I still can't believe I'm actually writing this down. My hands are shaking a little, partly from anger, partly from the pure satisfaction of what went down last month at Pinnacle Investments. Let me just say that if you've ever wanted to see corporate karma in action, grab a drink and settle in. It all started at the annual company gala. Picture this: the Grand Hyatt ballroom, crystal chandeliers, everyone dressed to the nines, champagne flowing like water. I'd been working at Pinnacle for 4 years as a senior financial analyst, and my husband Mark had finally agreed to come to one of these stuffy corporate events. He hates these things, always has, but he came because he knew how important this particular night was for me. I'm only coming for the free booze and to see the look on Michael Davidson's face when you get that promotion, Mark had said that morning while adjusting his tie in our bedroom mirror. I'd been up for the Director of Financial Strategy position, a role I'd been working toward for 3 years. You need to understand something about my husband. Mark teaches high school history and coaches wrestling. He's brilliant, has 2 master's degrees and could have gone corporate if he wanted, but he loves working with kids, loves making a difference. He's built like a former college athlete because he is one, reads voraciously, and doesn't give 2 shits about impressing people with money. He's the most authentic person I know, which is why I fell in love with him. My boss, Richard Crane, is his polar opposite. Harvard MBA, 3rd-generation wealth, summer house in the Hamptons. The whole cliche. He's the kind of guy who judges men by their watch brands and golf handicaps. I'd managed to keep these 2 men in my life completely separate for 4 years, and for good reason. But that night, everything collapsed. "So this is the famous Mark," Richard said, sidling up to us at the bar, martini in hand, his trophy wife Cassandra on his arm. "Tiffany talks about you all the time." I felt my stomach clench. I don't talk about Mark all the time at work. I'm professional like that. But I smiled and made the introductions. "Mark, this is my boss, Richard Crane. Richard, my husband, Mark." The 2 men shook hands and I saw Richard's eyes flicker down to Mark's wrist, checking for a watch, then back up, assessing. "History teacher, right? At what school again?" Richard asked, his tone carrying that slight edge I'd come to recognize when he was about to be condescending. "Roosevelt High," Mark answered simply, taking a sip of his whiskey. "Ah, that's where Tiffany volunteers sometimes." "Admirable work you do," Richard said in a way that didn't sound admirable at all. "Must be fulfilling to shape young minds. Though I imagine the pay is somewhat modest." I squeezed Mark's arm in warning. 4 years of carefully navigating Richard's social landmines had trained me to sense when he was circling in on someone he deemed inferior. "The compensation isn't just financial," Mark replied evenly. Richard chuckled like Mark had told a cute joke. Of course, the moral rewards." "Speaking of reward," he turned to me, "the executive committee is still deliberating on the director position. It's down to you and Brandon Stevens." My heart sank. Brandon was Richard's golf buddy's nephew, in the company barely 2 years. If it was still being deliberated, that meant politics were at play. "I'm sure you'll make the right decision based on performance metrics," I said, maintaining my professional smile. Richard's eyes narrowed slightly. He didn't like being challenged, even politely. "Performance is just one factor among many, Tiffany. Leadership requires a certain presence, a certain understanding of the world we operate in." "And what world is that exactly?" Mark asked innocently. Richard turned to him with the smile of a shark. "Our clients trust us with billions, Mark. They expect a certain caliber of people managing their money, people who understand their lifestyle, their concerns. I could feel the tension building. Other executives were drifting closer, sensing the entertainment value of Richard engaging with someone outside his usual circle. Must be nice managing other people's billions, Mark said, his voice light but his eyes steady on Richard. Though I suppose teaching 30 teenagers not to be assholes is its own kind of wealth management. A few nervous chuckles rippled through the small crowd gathering around us. Richard's smile tightened. Indeed. Different worlds entirely, Richard said. Then turning to the group. Mark here teaches history at a public school. Quite the contrast to our daily battles in the financial trenches, eh? I felt my face flush. He was using my husband as a punchline. Honey, Cassandra touched Richard's arm. I think Senator Williams just arrived. In a moment, dear. Richard waved her off, warming to his audience. I'm just fascinated by Mark's career choice. Tell me, what's the most challenging part of your day? Breaking up fights in the hallway or trying to explain to students why studying ancient civilizations matters when they could be learning to code? The room seemed to freeze. I saw several colleagues exchange uncomfortable glances. This was crossing a line, and everyone knew it. But before I could intervene, Mark smiled. Not his polite smile, his genuine one, the one that made his eyes crinkle at the corners. Actually, Richard, the hardest part is teaching kids about historical examples of power and hubris without making it obvious I'm talking about people like you. A shocked silence fell, followed by a few stifled laughs. Richard's face flushed red. Excuse me, he sputtered. Just making conversation, Mark said, raising his glass slightly. But since we're comparing careers, I've always wondered, what's it like having your self-worth entirely dependent on the size of your year-end bonus? Richard's jaw clenched. I don't think you understand the complexity and importance of what we do here. Oh, I understand perfectly, Mark replied calmly. You move imaginary money around to make more imaginary money, occasionally crashing real economies and walking away unscathed. Very complex. I should have been mortified. This was my workplace, my career on the line. But in that moment, watching my husband refuse to be belittled by a man who'd been subtly undermining me for years, all I felt was a fierce pride. Richard turned to me, his voice icy. Tiffany, perhaps you should escort your husband outside for some air. He seems overwrought. I'm feeling great, actually, Mark said, finishing his whiskey. But we should mingle. Lots of interesting people here. He turned to Cassandra. Mrs. Crane, a pleasure to meet you. Your husband has told us absolutely nothing about you, which seems a shame. With that, he took my hand and led me away, leaving Richard fuming in our wake. Mark, I hissed once we were out of earshot. That was necessary, he finished. Nobody talks to you or me like that, not even your boss. You don't understand. Richard holds grudges. He's vindictive. He's already on the fence about my promotion. And now what? He'll punish you because your husband wouldn't kiss his ring? If that's the case, Tiff, this isn't a place you want to advance in anyway. I wanted to argue, but deep down I knew he was right. Still, I'd worked so hard. Let's just try to salvage the evening, I sighed. But the damage was done. For the rest of the night, I caught Richard shooting daggers at us from across the room. When the CEO was giving his speech, Richard whispered something to him, and they both glanced our way. My stomach twisted into knots. Monday morning, I found out Brandon Stevens got the promotion. Richard called me into his office to deliver the news personally. The committee felt Brandon had a better grasp of our corporate culture, he explained, not even trying to hide his smug satisfaction. Fitting in is just as important as performance metrics, Tiffany. I hope you understand that now. I nodded stiffly. Is there anything specific I could improve upon for future consideration? Well, he leaned back in his leather chair. Judgment is a key quality we look for in leadership. That includes personal associations. The company we keep reflects upon us. Wouldn't you agree? The implication hung in the air between us. My husband. He was punishing me for my husband. Perfectly clear, sir, I said, standing up. Will that be all? For now, he smiled coldly. Oh, and Brandon will need your help transitioning into his new role. I told him you'd be happy to train him. I spent the rest of the day in a fog of rage and humiliation. When I got home that night, I broke down completely, telling Mark everything while furiously chopping vegetables for dinner. He actually said that? About personal associations? Mark asked, his voice dangerously quiet. Not in so many words, but the message was crystal clear. I slammed the knife down on a carrot with more force than necessary. 4 years of exceptional performance reviews, bringing in 2 major clients last quarter, completing the Morgan acquisition ahead of schedule. All of it means nothing because my husband dared to stand up to His Royal Highness. What do you want to do? Mark asked, taking the knife gently from my hand before I could injure myself. I don't know, I admitted. Part of me wants to quit spectacularly. Part of me wants to stick it out and prove him wrong. And a small, dark part of me wants to burn the whole place down. Metaphorically speaking, of course. Mark was quiet for a moment, thoughtfully continuing the vegetable chopping I'd abandoned. What if there was a fourth option? He finally said. I'm listening. What if we orchestrated a little lesson in hubris for Richard? And that's when the plan started to take shape. What I didn't know then was just how perfectly it would unfold, or how thoroughly Richard had underestimated my husband. See, while Richard saw Mark as just a modestly paid high school teacher, what he failed to understand was that Mark's brother-in-law is James Whitman, tech journalist for the Wall Street Journal, and Mark's college roommate is now Senator Thomas Reeves, who sits on the banking committee. And through his work with student government, Mark had mentored Zoe Chen, who now ran a popular financial watchdog blog. Over the next week, our apartment turned into a war room. Mark had his laptop open to financial watchdog sites while I spread documents across our dining table. Nothing confidential, just publicly available information about Pinnacle's questionable municipal bond deals in Detroit. Look at these fees, I pointed, jabbing my finger at a spreadsheet. 3 times industry standard, all approved by Richard personally. Mark was already typing furiously. James needs specifics, dates, amounts, names. Tell him to look at the Johnson Municipal Center refinancing. The city ended up paying millions more than necessary. Our phones buzzed constantly with updates from Mark's contacts. James Whitman from the WSJ wanted more details. Senator Reeves needed specific violations to justify an inquiry. Zoe Chen was preparing to publish as soon as we gave the green light. We launch tomorrow, Mark announced, slamming his laptop shut. The Journal runs the story at 4 p.m. Zoe's blog goes live simultaneously, and Tom will announce the committee inquiry by end of day. Are you sure about this? I asked, suddenly aware of the magnitude of what we were about to unleash. Mark grabbed my shoulders and looked me straight in the eyes. Richard destroyed your career because his ego got bruised. He's been ripping off struggling cities for years to fund his Hampton vacations. The question isn't if we should do this. It's why didn't someone do it sooner? I grabbed my phone. I'm calling James. Tell him to run with everything we've got." The next morning, I strode into the office with a secret smile, wondering when the bomb would detonate. I didn't have to wait long. At exactly 11:07 a.m., Richard's explosion was nuclear. "What the hell is this?" His roar echoed across the entire floor as he burst from his office, tablet in hand, face purple with rage. "Someone is dead. Who's been talking to the goddamn journal?" Every head turned. The office froze. Richard stormed through the bullpen, eyes wild. "You!" He jabbed a finger at a junior analyst. "Did you leak information about Detroit?" The poor kid looked terrified. "Richard, my office, now!" The CEO appeared, his face grim. "Someone's feeding lies to the press about the Detroit deals." Richard was practically foaming at the mouth. "I need to find the snake." "Richard, now!" The CEO's voice could have cut steel. My phone vibrated. It was Mark. "Showtime. Check WSJ." I pulled up the article on my phone, my heart pounding so loud I was sure my colleagues could hear it. James Whitman's expose was devastating. Detailed breakdowns of Richard's fee structures, quotes from Detroit officials who felt misled, comparisons showing Pinnacle charged 340% above industry standards. The headline was brutal. "Predatory Wall Street fees bleed struggling Detroit dry." Richard was mentioned by name, not 3 times, 17 times. "Holy shit," whispered the analyst next to me, reading over my shoulder. "We're screwed." Richard's office became Grand Central Station. Legal counsel rushed in, HR directors, the compliance team. Through the glass walls, I could see Richard's increasingly desperate gestures. His tie loosened, sweat staining his custom shirt. At 2:16 p.m., Zoe's blog post went live, with even more damning details and a headline that turned heads. Pinnacle Investments Richard Crane, a case study in municipal exploitation. By 3 p.m., news vans were parked outside our building. At 3:28 p.m., Senator Reeves announced a banking committee investigation live on CNBC. At 3:45 p.m., Richard stormed back into the bullpen, eyes locked on me. "You!" he snarled, marching toward my desk. "It was you, wasn't it?" I stood my ground as he invaded my personal space. "Excuse me?" "Detroit. The Journal. This witch hunt. You're behind it." The entire office watched in stunned silence. "I have no idea what you're talking about, Richard," I said calmly. "Though if there's something wrong with those deals, perhaps you should focus on explaining that instead of looking for scapegoats." "You vindictive bitch," he hissed, low enough that only I could hear. "This is about the promotion, isn't it? Or is it because I hurt your precious husband's feelings?" I smiled sweetly. "Richard, you seem stressed. Perhaps you should take a moment to compose yourself. The CEO is watching." He whirled around to see the CEO and 2 security guards approaching. "Richard, we need you to step away from Ms. Wilson immediately," the CEO said coldly. "And you need to come with us. The board has called an emergency meeting." Richard's face drained of color. "You can't seriously believe—" "Now, Richard." As security escorted him toward the elevator, Richard looked back at me with pure hatred. I met his gaze unflinchingly and gave him a small, satisfied wave. By 5 p.m., Richard had been suspended pending investigation, and I was enjoying a victory martini at home with Mark. "How bad is it?" Mark asked when I walked in the door. "The beginning of a Category 5 shitstorm," I replied, kicking off my heels. "Richard's career at Pinnacle is probably over. The question is whether the company will throw him under the bus to save themselves." "And how do you feel about that?" I considered the question carefully. Like justice is being served, but also sad that it came to this. I loved that job. I was good at it. Mark handed me a glass of wine. For what it's worth, I think you'll be better off somewhere that values you properly. He was right, of course. The next day, Richard was placed on administrative leave pending an internal investigation. The CEO called me into his office personally. "Tiffany," he began gravely, "I understand you work closely with Richard on several municipal bond deals." My heart raced, but I kept my face neutral. "Yes, sir. I provided financial analysis for the structuring, but Richard handled the client relationships in final terms." He nodded. "That's consistent with what we're finding. I want to be clear. We're conducting a thorough review of all Richard's deals. If there was any impropriety, the company will address it appropriately." "Of course, sir." "In the meantime," he continued, "we find ourselves in need of someone to step in and manage the financial strategy team. Someone familiar with our municipal clients. Someone with impeccable judgment." I tried not to let my surprise show. "I'd be happy to help however I can, sir." "Good. We'll call it acting director for now. Let's see how you handle things during this transitional period." Just like that, I was doing the job I'd been denied. The irony wasn't lost on me. Over the next 2 weeks, the story exploded. The Senate Banking Committee issued formal requests for documents. The SEC opened a preliminary inquiry. 3 municipal clients suspended their relationships with Pinnacle pending the outcome of investigations. And through it all, I kept my head down and did my job. I cooperated fully with the internal investigation, which concluded that while the fee structures in question were unusually high, they weren't technically illegal, just ethically questionable. The company announced reforms to its municipal bond practices and a renewed commitment to community partnership. Richard, however, wasn't so lucky. The investigation found emails where he dismissively referred to Detroit officials as financially illiterate and suggested they wouldn't notice the fee structure. There were also messages about how he'd use the inflated fees to boost his department's numbers and secure larger bonuses. The company fired him with a carefully worded statement about failure to uphold our values. 3 months later, I was permanently appointed Director of Financial Strategy. My first official act was to implement a new transparent fee structure for municipal clients that actually tied our compensation to positive outcomes for the communities. The day after my promotion was announced, I received a small package at my desk. Inside was a beautiful vintage fountain pen and a note that simply read, "For signing all your new director paperwork, congratulations." That night we were celebrating with champagne when my phone exploded with texts from colleagues. "Holy shit, Richard just got escorted out by security. They took his computer." CEO was furious. "Never seen him like this." Legal team locked in boardroom all night. "Is it true about the Detroit money? Were you involved?" I silenced my phone and clinked glasses with Mark. "It's a bloodbath at the office." "What did you expect?" Mark grinned. "Richard's been stealing from poor cities for years. The sharks can smell the blood in the water now." My phone rang. It was Brandon. I answered on speaker. "Tiffany, what the hell is happening? The feds just showed up with subpoenas." I shot Mark a surprised look. We hadn't anticipated federal involvement this quickly. "I don't know anything more than what's in the news, Brandon," I said innocently. "Maybe try asking Richard." "Oh, wait, you can't. He's been suspended." "This is serious," Brandon hissed. "They're looking at all the municipal deals, including ones I worked on under Richard's direction. I could get dragged into this too. Guess that promotion isn't looking so great now, huh?" I couldn't help myself. After hanging up, I turned to Mark. Federal investigators already? How did you manage that? Mark looked genuinely surprised. That wasn't me. Looks like once the story broke, someone else came forward with even more damning information. Richard has enemies everywhere, I laughed. We just needed to light the fuse. 2 days later, my phone rang with an unknown number. Is this Tiffany Wilson? A woman's voice, hushed and urgent. Yes, who's calling? It's Cassandra Crane. I need to talk to you. Not over the phone. My stomach tightened. Was this a trap? What about? I have information, she whispered. About Richard. About everything. Meet me at the Rosewood Cafe in an hour. Come alone. I texted Mark immediately. Cassandra wants to meet. Could be a setup. His reply was immediate. I'll be at a table nearby. If anything feels off, I'll intervene. An hour later, I spotted Cassandra in a corner booth. Sunglasses on despite the dim lighting, a scarf wrapped around her head. When I slid into the seat across from her, she glanced nervously around before pulling out a flash drive. Richard doesn't know I have this, she said, sliding it across the table. It's everything. Detroit was just the tip of the iceberg. I stared at the tiny device. Why are you giving this to me? Cassandra removed her sunglasses, revealing a fading bruise under her left eye. Because last night he hit me for the first time. Said I must have been the leak. Said I'd pay for ruining him. My blood ran cold. Cassandra, you need to... I've already filed a police report and gotten a restraining order. She cut me off. But that's not enough. Richard needs to be stopped permanently. What's on the drive? She leaned forward. Offshore accounts, shell companies, bribes to city officials. He's been running a side business using Pinnacle's reputation as cover. The Detroit deals were legitimate compared to what else he's been doing. Have you looked at these files yourself? Enough to know that there's evidence of at least $15 million in embezzled funds. Her hands trembled as she took a sip of water. And names, politicians, judges, other executives at Pinnacle who were involved. I felt lightheaded. This was bigger than I'd imagined. Why not take this to the authorities yourself? Because Richard has friends in the FBI's local office, she said grimly. I need someone I can trust to make sure this gets to the right people. Someone with a reason to make sure Richard goes down. Our eyes met in silent understanding. There's more, she continued. Richard knows someone talked to the press. He's convinced it was someone at Pinnacle. He's hired people to find out who. Hired people? Not the kind you find in the yellow pages, Cassandra said, her voice barely audible. He's dangerous, Tiffany, more than you know. Be careful. As she stood to leave, she pressed a piece of paper into my hand. This is my burner phone number. When you've looked at the files, call me. I have more. That night, Mark and I huddled over his laptop, stunned by what we found on the drive. Holy shit, Mark whispered as we scrolled through spreadsheets detailing millions moving through shell companies in the Caymans. This is straight up RICO territory. Look at these names, I pointed at the screen. 2 senators, a federal judge, the deputy mayor of Detroit. Richard wasn't just skimming fees, Mark said. He was running a full-blown corruption ring. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. They know it was you. Richard coming for you. Destroy the drive. See. Mark and I looked at each other, the same thought passing between us. We need to make copies, he said, already ejecting the drive. And we need to get these to people who can't be bought. James could publish, but this needs federal attention, I said. Not local FBI. We need to go higher. Mark nodded grimly. I have a former student who works for the U.S. Attorney in the Southern District. She owes me a favor. That's when we heard the glass break downstairs. Someone's in the house, Mark whispered, killing the lights. I grabbed my phone, my hands shaking so badly I could barely dial 911. Heavy footsteps on the stairs. Mark pushed me behind him, grabbing a baseball bat from beside the bed. The bedroom door crashed open. 2 men in black masks, one with a gun. "Where's the drive?" the taller one demanded. "What drive?" Mark's voice was steady. "Don't play dumb. Crane wants his property back, and he wants to know who you've been talking to." The gunman stepped forward. "We can do this easy or—" The window behind them shattered as a canister flew in, releasing a cloud of smoke. Suddenly the room was filled with shouting, lights, bodies in motion. "FBI, drop your weapons. On the ground now." I couldn't see through the smoke, but I heard thuds, curses, the sound of handcuffs. When it cleared, 4 FBI agents in tactical gear stood in our bedroom, the intruders face down in restraints. "Mrs. Wilson? Mr. Wilson? I'm Agent Ramirez." A woman in an FBI windbreaker stepped forward. "We've been monitoring Mr. Crane since we received some anonymous information. When we saw these men enter your home, we intervened." "Thank you," I said, still shaking, but I was told Richard had friends in the local FBI. Agent Ramirez smiled thinly. "Not in my division, and certainly not after what came across my desk this morning." She held up a flash drive identical to Cassandra's. "Turns out Mrs. Crane sent copies to multiple agencies. Smart woman." Over the next week, the story exploded. The FBI raided Richard's home and offices. Sealed indictments were issued for 12 people, including 2 Pinnacle executives and several public officials. The financial press called it one of the largest municipal corruption scandals in recent history. And through it all, Cassandra Crane emerged as the unlikely hero, the abused wife who'd been secretly gathering evidence against her husband for years, waiting for the right moment to bring him down. "I never suspected," I told her over lunch a month later, after Richard had been denied bail as a flight risk. "You played the trophy wife role so convincingly." Cassandra smiled, a different woman from the frightened, disguised figure in the cafe. "I was an accountant before I met Richard. He made me quit, said it wasn't appropriate for his wife to work. But I never stopped watching the numbers, and I never forgave him for making me feel worthless." 6 months later, I was testifying before a grand jury, detailing everything I knew about Richard's financial schemes. The next day, I accepted a new position, heading the SEC's new Municipal Finance Ethics Division. "From corporate analyst to federal watchdog," Mark said proudly as we celebrated that night. "Who would have thought Richard's little insult at the gala would lead to this?" "Speaking of new roles," I grinned, "guess who's been invited to speak at Roosevelt High's Career Day?" "You?" "Both of us. The principal wants to showcase a power couple who took down a corruption ring. Apparently, you're quite the hero to the students now that the story's public." Mark laughed. "From just a teacher to FBI informant, not a career path I ever imagined." The next month, standing before a classroom of wide-eyed teenagers, I looked at the eager faces and felt something I never experienced at Pinnacle: genuine pride. "Financial crimes aren't victimless," I explained. "When someone like Richard Crane steals from cities like Detroit, real people suffer. Schools go underfunded, roads go unrepaired, communities crumble." A sharp-eyed girl raised her hand. "But how did you find the courage to stand up against such powerful people?" I glanced at Mark, then at Cassandra, who had joined us as a guest speaker. "You find people who value integrity over power," I said, And when the moment comes to choose between what's easy and what's right, you choose right, even when it's terrifying. That night, Mark and I had dinner at our favorite restaurant to celebrate the 6-month anniversary of my promotion. As we clinked glasses, he asked, "Any regrets about how it all went down?" I considered the question carefully. I regret that it was necessary. I regret not standing up to Richard sooner, on my own terms. But I don't regret the outcome. The company is actually better now, more ethical. Richard faced consequences he deserved, and I'm in a position to make real change. So justice was served, Mark said. With a side of karma, I added. To justice, then, he raised his glass again. And to the best revenge of all, I smiled, living well. Because that's the thing about revenge. The best kind isn't just about making someone else suffer. It's about creating a better world in the aftermath. Richard tried to make me small, to make Mark seem insignificant. But in the end, his own smallness was his downfall, while we emerged stronger, more fulfilled, and more true to ourselves than ever. 2 years later, I was sitting in my office at the SEC when my assistant rushed in. "Turn on the news now." I flicked on the TV to see Richard Crane being led out of a courthouse in handcuffs, his expensive lawyer trailing behind. Breaking news in the landmark financial corruption case that has rocked Wall Street, the reporter announced. Former Pinnacle Investments executive Richard Crane has been sentenced to 18 years in federal prison for racketeering, wire fraud, conspiracy, and witness intimidation. The judge called his crimes a betrayal of public trust at the highest level and ordered Crane to pay $42 million in restitution to affected municipalities. The camera zoomed in on Richard's face, haggard, defeated, but still burning with rage. As if sensing he was being watched, he looked directly into the camera. "This isn't over," he snarled. "Wilson, I know you're watching. This isn't over." A marshal yanked him toward the prisoner transport van. My phone rang. It was Mark. "Are you watching this?" "Every glorious second," I replied. "His threats don't worry you?" I laughed. "What's he going to do from a federal penitentiary?" I would get my answer 3 months later at the fundraising gala for Cassandra's new foundation for financial literacy for women. Mark and I were chatting with donors when my former colleague Brandon appeared, looking nervous. "Tiffany, can I speak with you privately? It's urgent." In a quiet corner, Brandon handed me a thumb drive. "Richard reached out to me from prison," he whispered, "offered to pay off my gambling debts if I helped him get revenge on you." My blood froze. What kind of revenge? "He has offshore accounts the feds haven't found. He wanted me to hack your SEC files, plant evidence that you've been taking bribes." Brandon swallowed hard. "I said yes, but I'm coming to you instead. Everything he sent me is on this drive." "Why help me?" I asked suspiciously. "You took my promotion." Brandon looked ashamed. "And I've regretted it every day. Richard threatened to fire me if I didn't accept it. I was a coward." I studied his face, then nodded toward Cassandra across the room. "Give your statement to her. She has a direct line to the U.S. Attorney." As Brandon walked away, Mark appeared at my side. "Problem?" "The opposite," I smiled. "Richard just added conspiracy to commit fraud from behind bars to his rap sheet." The next morning, Richard's prison cell was raided. The new charges extended his sentence by another decade. 1 month later, Mark and I were celebrating at our favorite restaurant when a familiar figure approached our table. But this time, it wasn't Richard. It was his son, Richard Jr., a young man I'd met only once at company functions. "Mrs. Wilson," he said formally, May I join you for a moment? We nodded and he sat, clearly uncomfortable. I wanted to, he struggled with the words, to apologize for my father, for what he tried to do to you. That's not your responsibility, I said. Maybe not, he agreed, but I'm trying to make things right where I can. I've been cooperating with the authorities to find all his hidden assets. And he took a deep breath. I've applied to teach history at Roosevelt High. I want to do something meaningful with my life. Mark and I exchanged shocked glances. My father always mocked teachers, Richard Jr. continued. Said they were failures who couldn't succeed in the real world. But when I visited him in prison, he finally told me the truth, that the man he respected most, the man who outsmarted him, was a high school history teacher. As he left, Mark squeezed my hand. Now that, he said softly, is the sweetest revenge of all. I nodded, thinking of Richard in his prison cell, knowing that his own son had rejected everything he stood for in favor of the path Mark had chosen. To unexpected legacies, I toasted, raising my glass. And to the power of teaching by example, Mark replied. Because that's the thing about true justice. It doesn't just punish the guilty. It transforms the world they leave behind into something better than they could have imagined.